In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter for me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the very beginning of barley harvest.
Welcome back to episode 2, part 2 of our Ruth study. I hope you enjoyed your introduction, and I hope you're enjoying listening to the women of Stonegate read each chapter of Ruth. I think it's so fun that they are getting to be a part of this in that sweet way. The guide is actually built for you to study a little bit of those chapters before and work through those questions and then listen to the podcast. Obviously, we can do it in any order you want, but just know that the guide is there to help you observe, think through the people, the places, and the plot before you come to the podcast. And so we're glad to have you back and to jump into part 2. I got so
Yes.
excited after the introduction.
Oh, yes. I was instantly like, I have never thought about it like this. And also, I don't know what that is. So I need to read more and find out. I don't know what that is.
I know. I love that when we study something, especially in community, and you kind of are sharing, it kind of just gets you more excited and lights that flame. And so I hope that's happening in your groups. And just as you're listening, that you can think, wow, there's a bigger story happening here, and the Old
Mm-hmm.
Testament's not lame. And I mean, this is fun. So
Yeah.
I can't wait to get into this one, part
This is going to
2.
be great.
That's
We are
awesome.
jumping into chapter 1. We finally get to dig into the weeds on this thing. So if you love Ruth already, like, here we go. You're going to love this. So Doctor, Ruth
Mhm.
chapter 1.
Yeah.
We are getting actually a ton of information in a really compact little
Mhm.
chapter. This is incredible storytelling,
Sure.
but we'll take it one section at a time. We are given a lot of important people, places,
Uh-huh.
and moments
Yeah.
in just a few verses. So
Yeah.
let's take it with the first section. Like in verses 1 through 5,
Mhm.
what should we be paying attention to? What should our ears be
Yeah.
perking up? What's being given to us here?
Yeah, think of these first 5 verses as like the prologue, right? It's just the
Okay.
preface of the book. It's kind of getting you everything you need to know about the time, the history, the setting, and how things are starting off. So obviously, we talked about in the introduction about in the days of the judges. So automatically, you're thinking of Judges. You're thinking of Bethlehem. Hopefully, you're thinking of the Bethlehem cycle, where it's like this is a really bad Bethlehem.
Yeah.
And if you can get that context there, then you kind of understand why there's a famine in the land. Because in Deuteronomy, God warns them, if you don't obey my covenant, if you don't keep the covenant, I'm going to shut off the clouds and your ground's going to become like iron, right? It's going to be famine. And there's already an irony right out of the gate.
Okay.
Bethlehem, the
Okay.
house of bread, that's what the Hebrew word of Bethlehem means.
Okay.
Beth, house, and then lechem is bread.
There we
So
go.
the house of bread is empty.
The house
it's-
of bread has no bread.
That's right.
Like Whataburger has no burgers.
That's
like
right.
the keto diet.
It's right. It's like,
No bread.
man, it's like going to In-N-Out Burger and finding out all they got is lettuce wraps
Yeah,
left.
yeah.
It's like there's
Protein
no
style.
joy.
Normal
Yeah,
style.
exactly.
There
No
you go.
joy in that at all. And so immediately off the bat, and you kind of see it in the characters too. You get the irony of a man named Eli Melech, and Eli Melech just means God is my king, right? That's what his name means. And ironically, God's not really his king. He's the one making the decisions. Times get tough in Bethlehem. So what does he do? He pulls up stakes and he goes to Moab.
Okay, so that's bad. So
That's
like when
bad.
we read famine, we should think it's famine because they're disobeying God. It's not
Right.
just, oop, a famine happened, we don't know.
That's right.
It's like you read famine and you should know it's because things have gone bad. That Israel
Absolutely.
is not walking with God.
right.
And then we should know that Elimelech saying, let's sojourn in Moab. That was a bad call.
That was
They're
a
not
bad
supposed to do that.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the right move would be towards repentance,
Okay.
towards faith. And instead, he kind of takes the pragmatic option.
Okay.
Like, let's just take what works.
Okay.
It's raining in Moab, so we're going to go there.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
God's not really functioning like Eli Melech's king, even though his name means my God is king,
Okay.
right? So there's all these ironies. The house of bread is without bread.
Okay.
Eli Melech is actually not living with the Lord as his king. And then you get the names of their sons, Mahlon and Chilion,
Okay.
which basically just means frail and sickly. Like their
Oh.
names are
Ooh.
Yeah.
frail and sick. Can you imagine naming your kids like, yeah, this is my firstborn frail?
Well, I think it's good for you you're pointing them out. But if I'm at home, what would be a good like resource to say, okay, names seem to matter in the
Mhm.
Bible. I'm
Yeah.
picking up that theme.
yeah,
Towns are named for a reason.
sure.
Where would you just go to look for
Yeah.
so I can kind of resource myself if
Yeah.
I'm doing a book that's not
Yeah.
handed to me on a podcast?
There's
Yeah.
so many good options. I mean, we live in just a resource rich age.
do.
There is a free version of Logos that you could go to, and you just hover your mouse over the word, and it would tell you what the Hebrew word means there. You don't have to know Hebrew to
Logos, right?
yeah,
Logos. Yep.
Which is ironic because it's supposed to be pronounced logos, but it's fine. Whatever.
It's logos,
I,
folks.
I'm just
And we'll put that in the show notes for you.
it is what it is.
Yes.
Another free resource would be Blue Letter Bible,
Mhm.
which is free online.
Love that one.
But one of my favorite resources that I've used over time, and I bought it and passed it out like candy to people I've discipled, was the ESV Study Bible. Tons of
Okay,
great
great.
footnotes, tons of great just little historical background. So if you don't have an ESV Study Bible, I mean, it's really rich. It's going to be right there in your lap, ready to kind of give you some of this stuff. So,
Yeah, I think that just helps when we're reading something that, like she mentioned,
Oh, yeah.
if you listen to the audio of Ruth, it's 9 minutes.
right.
And
yeah.
so there's so much in the first 3 verses here that we
Absolutely.
can grab, and just knowing how to get that,
Yeah.
feed ourselves is really helpful. So
Yeah.
that's great.
So that whole prologue is just setting up that irony of like, A life of covenant disobedience is an ironic life.
Mm.
Instead of getting a house of bread, you're going to get a house of famine. Instead of having God as my king, you're going to live as your own king. Instead of your kids being flourishing and healthy and everything, they're going to be sickly and frail. But there's other things that are happening too that you have to point out. I
Yeah.
think because there is that negative side of the context, because it is setting it up like these are bad days, right?
Right.
But then if we're also talking about that sovereign serendipity, where
Yeah.
it's like these are seemingly bad days for sure, but God's still doing something. So we talked about famine, and you mentioned when we read the word famine, we should think covenant curse, like covenant disobedience. And that's true because Deuteronomy says that. But there's also another way to think about famine too. So it's not either or, it's both and. God moves his people where they need to be through famine.
Yeah.
Like you think about how did Israel end up in Egypt?
Yeah.
It was because of a famine. Famine hit the land, and Jacob sends his sons, and that's where they're reunited with Joseph. God's constantly moving his people through famine as well. So famine is a covenant curse, but it's also a key way that God creates a situation that moves people where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
So there's a real big tension there
Yeah,
because
there's
There's like a
tension.
simultaneous, like there is discipline for the disobedience,
right.
and yet God's care is still
Mhm.
all over it and moving in redemption. Like,
Absolutely. Yeah. Humans are responsible, right? They're responsible for their actions. And yet, even in sin, they don't stop the sovereignty of God. Like like I don't know how the book of Ruth would have played out if Elimelech would have stayed in Bethlehem. But God would have worked out his purpose the way he wanted to. He's still sovereign. And I just think even right off the bat, we're left with facing this reality of even when there's bad times because of our bad choices, God's still the author.
Yeah.
God's still writing. So I can't screw up God's plan, really, at the end of the day. Now, it doesn't mean that I should follow Elimelech's step and be like, whatever, God can do whatever, because Elimelech ends up dead by verse 5. So
take that note. You could
that's
end up
right.
dead.
God's
that.
sovereignty means that his plan will happen, but his sovereignty doesn't mean we won't have to pay the consequences for our sin.
Yeah.
And that is something you see in these first 5 verses. So you see that with the famine moving, like God is moving his people. I mentioned the Exodus theme. The word sojourn there in verse 1 is really important. And then if you look at verse 2, it talks about the name of the 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. You wouldn't see this in English because we have the word sons, but in Hebrew there's 2 words for sons. One would be banan, the other one is yeled, which is like lad, like little boy. And in this text, it uses the little boy language. Naomi had 2 little boys,
Wow.
which is a weird way to put it because they're
They're
men.
grown men. Yeah.
I was
At this
about
point,
to ask, is that more maturity or is that age?
Well, it's actually trying to connect it with the book of Exodus because it's Hebrew yeleds, Hebrew little boys that die in Exodus 1.
Right.
And so with the famine, the sojourning, and the death of Hebrew lads, it's intentional. These are the strange moves that you're like, as I'm reading it and I was looking at it, again, I had to do some Hebrew study here on this, but it's like, it's a weird move for the author to describe marriage age men as like lads, little boys. And that was another little stirring moment where I was like, okay, wait a second. We got famine. We've got sojourning in a foreign country, and we've got the death of Hebrew baby boys. It's like that's where the author's kind of signaling like, hey, I'm making some strange moves here because I want you to think about the Exodus.
So like this is what you had mentioned in the introduction. This is like the music that from Hamilton, you start hearing this song and you're actually going to hear it go throughout the story. Like we have movies like this. I'll date myself, but like if I have music that sounds like the Shire from the Lord of the Rings. Like it's throughout. Every time they talk about the Shire and even missing the Shire, it's like do-do-do-do-do, right?
Yeah,
so these are the core. They're hitting the music notes here that are supposed to cast your mind back to what happened in Exodus.
That's right. Yeah. And I think you're just kind of living in the depth of the detail here at this moment.
So
I mean,
cool,
just kind of looking at each of these things and even we're going back to that thing, like these are bad days. It's the days of the judges, famine in the land. They're receiving covenant curses. The house of bread is empty. There's no bread in the house of bread.
Yeah.
Eli Melech's living as his own king. His kids are sickly and frail. And then you find out where they go to. Their sons disobey Deuteronomy's laws not to take on foreign women as wives.
Okay, so
And-
there's a famine, and they left, and they married foreign women.
That's right.
It just got worse, even
right.
more worse.
That's right. And that's not it's not an ethnic thing at all, because Rahab got married. She was not ethnic Israel. It's a covenantal thing. So the Israelites were not to link up with foreign women who still had foreign gods.
Okay.
Okay.
You could marry a foreign woman who is recognizing Yahweh as her God. Rahab, again, there's Rahab as an example right there. She's recognizing Yahweh as the Lord, and who she married, which ironically is in Boaz's family line.
Maybe that's some sovereign certificate.
That's
saying.
right. That's right. Boaz was it his grandma or his mother?
His mom.
His mom. Yeah. It's like she's not ethnic Israel, so it has nothing to do with their ethnicity. It's the fact that they take on foreign women before these foreign women have Yahweh as God. And not only that, they're Moabites.
Yeah, lean into that a little bit. You said something in the
Because
introduction.
I feel like I'm supposed to feel something when it says it, because when you read it, it's like they took Moabite wives. And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Should I react to that? What should I be feeling? Who
Yeah.
are the Moabites?
Just to put it kind of crassly, Moabites are gross. Like they're just, if you know anything in the Pentateuch of it, it's like, how did the Moabites begin? Well,
How did they begin, Justin? Tell us.
Lot lost his wife at Sodom and Gomorrah. She turns into a pillar of salt.
Right.
His daughters get him drunk, and he sleeps with one of them, and her child is named Moab.
And thus the people of...
That's the
That's the people of
Moab.
Moabites. Yep.
Began by incest.
Incest. So you think Moabites, and you just think backwoods, incest, interbreeders, right? Like that's the kind of the context of where they're coming from. And not only that, the Moabites were a part of the biggest travesty that happened as Israel's coming into the land. So just doing a little bit of background, a little bit in Numbers, Israel's coming into the land, and King Balak, hires Balaam. So if you've ever heard of Balaam and his talking donkey, it's that story. Hires Balaam to come curse Israel. Balaam knows he can't curse what God has blessed, but he knows that Israel can curse themselves if they sin. So what does he do? He gets Moabite women to dance seductively in front of the Israelite men.
Where have we heard these things before?
Right? Yes. And in Numbers, the people link up with the Moabites and worship Baal, and it causes thousands of Israelites to die. So it's like I don't even know if we have an equivalent in our modern history for this, but just imagine the worst enemy tricking you into nuking yourself. Right? Like you think they're linking up with you, and actually all they're trying to do is trying to get you to commit covenantal suicide.
Yeah.
So the Moabites are like, they're the worst of the worst. They're started by incest, and not only that, they lead the people into sin, and they're the reason thousands of Israelites are dead in the wilderness. And then they continue to war with Israel for the rest of their time. So Moabites are not loved people. They are Nazi Germany to a Judges era Israel.
Wow.
They hate those guys. So now you know why when we read Moabites, you should go, Moabites.
Exactly. There's gritted teeth.
Moabites.
Oh, yeah.
Those guys.
Yeah. I mean, these are the orcs of the Lord of the Rings series.
Oh, gosh. How many of those references can we get in the podcast?
We're going to at least 15
Well,
an
even
episode.
as we sit and wonder about Naomi, it's like, I mean, I'm sure there's women listening that are like, why is my son dating that person?
Totally.
It's like this was a mom that was watching her two sons choose this as their life. And she would be, this is so interesting when you really just read it and say, okay, if I was the mother of these two boys, and I'm like, would you guys grow up? I mean, you just
Get it together.
Put your mother hat on. It's a whole nother, and my husband's just made all these terrible choices and I'm getting dragged along.
Yep.
I mean, she's already entering just hard.
Totally.
Like what her life has dealt her and by the people and the choices of people around her.
We hear the victim mentality, but she really is in the victim role here. I mean, she's just being moved, around, and she's kind of vulnerable to all of this. And yeah, I mean, Naomi pays the price
Mm.
for Elimelech's bad decision
Yeah.
in a big way.
Mm.
Now,
Right.
we're not going to get too far ahead of the story, but you know
Yeah.
what
Mhm.
what she pays the price
Hope
for.
is coming.
God steps
But
in.
in this moment, we need
Yeah.
to sit here. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one other thing that I think you need to see here. These women are married to Mahlon and Chilion, and how long are they married for them?
10 years.
10 years, and guess what they don't have? No children.
No children.
No children. And again, it's like there is a covenant curse in that because they've disobeyed the Lord. God's
Right.
He's not blessing this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing because again, let's just take another spin at the bigger picture of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Every matriarch in the Pentateuch was barren.
That's right.
Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel were all at different points barren. So again, we have the Abraham theme coming up here, where Ruth is just another one of the barren patriarchs that eventually is going to go from being literally empty
Right.
to being full with a baby. You know, it's just it's another cool theme there. So all that to say, there's a lot there, and you've got to. And I hope what you're seeing here is I'm thinking through both the negative side, like there's a covenant curse side and the bad side, but there's also what is God doing here side,
Yeah.
and you've got to play with both because famine is a covenant curse, but it's also a key tool that God uses to move people around.
Yeah.
And that's how we read the Bible. We think about what is what's here because of human responsibility, and what is God allowing to happen here. I mean, God didn't cause Elimelech to go up to Moab, but he sovereignly allowed it.
Yeah.
Like he didn't make him do it,
Right.
but he did allow it and use it for his redemptive purposes. And that's where human responsibility and God's sovereignty come together here. So,
You see it ultimately too, like you see with Jesus, right?
yeah.
There's a human authority that decided that Jesus should die.
Yeah.
There was Pharisees that weighed in on that, and a high priest, and even Pontius. And there's all these people who, on a human level, are making these choices to decide what to do with him. And yet, over all of that terrible moment, God is sovereign in all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the moment of the cross is a terrible judgment and an incredible redemption,
Yeah.
all in the same move.
That's right.
It is a wrathful, horrible injustice that happens, and it's the way that redemption came to the earth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And so it's
absolutely.
all of that at the same things are at work here.
Yeah.
For those who like fun facts, Justin, what is an Ephrathite? It says they were
Ephrathite,
Ephrathites
yeah.
from Bethlehem and Judah.
Yeah, so it's a minor tribe of Israel. So Bethlehem has two names, and I hope I'm not butchering this, but when you go back, Rachel dies in the land of Ephrath.
Okay.
I can't ever say it right, but near
Ephathra.
Bethlehem. So this tribal name and this city kind of go together here.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
For inquiring minds that want to know.
That's right.
yeah, yeah.
All right, let's keep moving. So now the lads have died, so the women are left without their two sons and their husband. Now they're alone, and now the women are together and they have this conversation.
Yeah.
Talk to us about this conversation, how the young women, how they react, and what Naomi's telling them to do, and
Yeah.
why does this conversation matter?
Yeah, so Naomi hears that the Lord has visited his people in Bethlehem. So again, she's like, well, God's allowed it to rain. So she's looking to see where the hand of God is moving here, and she wants to go back to Bethlehem because he's not moved for her.
Yeah.
Again, that Lord has visited is a really pregnant word there, where it's like God's not done with his people; he's still working. Now, I think putting yourself in Naomi's shoes here. There's no social help or welfare here, right? There's no life insurance policies
Right.
around.
Yeah.
So Naomi's got to somehow eat, and she's got these daughters, and they're vulnerable and exposed too. And so again, with no welfare program, it's up to them to kind of feed themselves here. And Naomi's thinking very pragmatically here. She's just thinking, look, I can't take on dependence.
Right.
I can't take on dependence. So she's wanting to go back, and we read this and we're right to say Naomi doesn't have faith in God's provision. That's true, but I'm not sure I would either after going
Right.
through what I mean, this
Sure.
is just the raw, real moment
Deep
of
grief.
yeah,
She's buried
she's
two
just
sons
hurting.
and a
Yeah,
husband and
Mhm.
doesn't know where
yeah,
her next meal's coming. Yeah.
that's right. So we
A
can't be
lot of
too
empathy.
hard on Naomi here. I mean, I wouldn't be any different. Like if
Mhm.
I had gone to a foreign land and I had a full, yeah, my arms are full with my boys and my husband, and now I'm coming back and I'm literally empty handed.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
I would probably feel very similar to what Naomi feels here.
Right.
Mhm.
And so she's just thinking practically, I can't take care of you.
Mhm.
Um, but we also do see that Naomi's also just bought into the bad theology of her day. So
Mm.
in the book of Judges, you find the Israelites are very syncretistic,
Mhm.
and what that word means is they have Yahweh, they have God. They also see God in light of all the other gods that
Mhm.
there are, and it's one of the reasons why you find a Levite at the end of Judges, who is also a priest to a idol. Like he's
Okay.
a Levite to Yahweh, but he's also a priest to some. And what they were doing was they were bringing the Canaanite ideology, the Canaanite thoughts of God, together with their thoughts of Yahweh.
Mhm.
And so what she's thinking here is, just to kind of give a little background into the story. Back then, your home country was the jurisdiction of your God. If
Mhm.
if you're a Moabite, you needed to live in Moab for your Moabite God to bless you.
Oh, okay.
If you left Moab, you've gone beyond your God's boundaries and jurisdictions, and he can't bless you there. He can't
Okay.
protect you there. So leaving a foreign land without your God, I mean, you're exposed. You're exposed. And that's one of the reasons why she tells her daughters, let's see, uh it's later on here in chapter 1 where she tells Ruth, go back to your gods, right? To your father's house. Um, Orpah takes her up on the option, but Ruth doesn't. But that's kind of the what Naomi is seeing. Yeah, here it is in verse 15. See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods.
Mm.
Return after your sister-in-law. She's just recognizing you're Moabite. Your Moabite God is going to bless you if you stay. So don't come with me because you'll be exposed and vulnerable. I can't take care of you. And she's thinking they're probably young wives at this point. We just kind of get that from they're going back to their father's house. There's a chance for them to remarry possibly. So she's just thinking that how's this going to work out? Well, I got to figure this out, send them back home. And it's ironic because in Hebrew culture, the rabbis used to teach that if anybody who was a Gentile wanted to become a Jew, you were to turn them away 3 times. And if they persisted after you told them to go home 3 times, then you could allow them to convert to Judaism.
Wow.
So in many ways, the opportunity to go back
The
home.
testing of it. Yeah.
That's right.
You can leave and go back.
That's right. And that's what highlights Ruth's faith here is she gets denied. And she won't be denied though. I'm not going to let you send me back home.
Yeah.
And the real faith here is just her, again, taking that Abrahamic faith. It's like, hey, he promised Abraham, I will be your God and you'll be my people. And I'm applying that to me. I'm going to leave the jurisdiction of my Moabite gods and I'm coming after your God in faith that he'll bless. I mean, it's just a huge moment here where, and again, you stop to think like, who is doing this? It's not Naomi, the Israelite. You'd think the Israelite would have the faith in Yahweh.
Right.
It's not the people of Israel because Book of Judges, they're crazy,
Yeah.
It's Ruth that has the best theology here. She just knows that she's got to leave her land, no supplemental insurance. I'm leaving my God's jurisdiction to find blessing with your God.
Yeah.
So it's a huge step of faith.
She's an enormous amount of faith.
Yeah.
Love her for that. When we were talking about reading this section, Naomi goes into this speech at the end that she's like, I can't even have more son. If I could bear a son and give him to you, it would take too long. And so it feels like this really intense focus on getting these girls a husband.
Yeah.
Which in our world, it's a little bit like, can't these ladies find a job? Like, can't they get some work somewhere, wash station
Sure,
somewhere?
yeah,
And like,
yeah.
what is the hyper focus on? Like, they need husbands. Maybe they could come from Naomi, but now that system's not working.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
coming at it, reading it, it feels like this enormous focus on just getting these girls some guys to marry, which
Yeah.
lands weird.
Yeah, I mean, there is two sides of this. There's a cultural issue of like, again, there's no societal help for
Yeah.
these ladies, and so they have no covering, they have no help, no protection.
Yeah.
And so they are exposed in their culture, and there's lots of places in the world that this is still like this.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
where if your husband dies, you're on your own, and you're just
Yeah.
vulnerable, and but there's the other side of the Lord in his sovereignty and allowing the author to write the way he is, he's setting up the buildup on Ruth's desperate need for a redeeming husband, for a redeemer.
Yeah.
So he's using the culture of the
Yeah.
time and being like, Ruth has no husband. She needs a redeemer. She
Yeah.
desperately needs a redeemer. And so I think you don't see the huge need for the redeemer until you see kind of in the context of like, she's incredibly exposed. For all intents and purposes, her life is over
Yeah.
in many ways. What does she expect to find in Israel? A husband? No, you're a Moabite woman. You're not going to find a husband there.
Right.
And again, Naomi's just thinking very practically, but it's setting up this, how is this Moabite woman who's taking a leap of faith to follow Yahweh and to stick with Yahweh, how is this Moabite woman going to find a redeemer?
Yeah.
Who's going to take care of her, and not just take care of her, but actually redeem Naomi as well. So
And redeem the past that she's been in. And I mean,
Totally.
really, it's just such a story of like, she has so much hope.
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
in her faith.
Well, Ruth has her incredible confession of faith. Your people are going to be, I'm going to live where you live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God.
What verse
And
is that? Where we at?
that is 17.
Yep.
And I will die with you, and may the Lord do so to me, or worse, if anything but death parts me from you. So I'm in, and I will not leave. So Ruth digs her heels in a beautiful, beautiful way.
Yeah.
And then they make a decision, and they are going to go. They're going to go back to Bethlehem from where they came. And this is where the chapter will end us. They are traveling back, and they arrive in Bethlehem, and the whole town is stirred because of them. So what about this? Naomi changes her name here.
Yeah. So the word Naomi means pleasant one. Like you just think of like a pleasant, just whatever, pleasant flavor, pleasant smell, whatever it is. Her name means pleasant one. And she rejects that name because pleasant kind of has the connotation of a good life or a good, blessed life. And she changes it to Mara, which is bitterness. I mean, it's just, this tragedy has hit her so hard that it's actually felt like an identity shift for her. Like she can't even take the name Pleasant anymore. And I just think of, again, I kind of want to bring it to our experience here. It's like there are some tragedies that, I think of the loss of a child that just hits at a whole deeper level. Miscarriages, all those things. I mean, it feels like you have to even throw off the recognition that there's anything good in your life. And and she's bitter in this. But what she's doing, again, think of this first chapter like the black drop that highlights the diamond that's about to come. And I think it's a good paradigm to think about our whole lives here. She's emphasizing my life is not pleasant, it's bitter. I'm Mara.
Yeah.
She's emphasizing that the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. And then she says these phrases, I went away full and the Lord has brought me back empty. And all of this is setting the context. She would describe her life as bitter and empty. But by the end of the book, she's going to be Naomi with her arms full with her baby, with a baby named Obed, which she treats as her own son. And so I just think when we're looking at this, again, Ruth has 4 chapters here.
Yeah.
And like any good story, it's the trial, it's the suffering that sets the context and sets the contour. So some of the things that we hate the most, suffering, loss, emptiness, hardship, is actually the thing that God uses to create a really beautiful story. And we need to see that that's kind of like where Naomi is right now. All it is a black backdrop. And that's all she sees. And it's not until chapter 4 that God puts the big diamond right in the middle of it. It's like, I put this here so that you can now enjoy the diamond and the brilliance and of the diamond and how beautiful it is. So, at this moment, she's just a hurting woman And there's a lot of foreshadowing. She went full, she's coming back empty, and she's coming back during barley harvest. Well, when she left, the house of bread was empty.
Yeah.
Now the barley harvest is happening. So they went from famine to harvest. And that's just kind of a little foreshadow of like, what if God does the same in her life? What if she goes from barren to full, empty to full? And and I think that's a big theme here, and a big theme throughout the whole Bible. God always brings his people from famine to feast. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
We don't always, we may live in the middle of the famine,
Yeah.
but he always brings his people from famine to feast, from emptiness to fullness. May not happen in this lifetime, may not happen in the next 20 years, but as Christians, we believe that God will not leave his people empty-handed and in famine.
One of the things
go ahead.
I love about Naomi and her character in this is like, if I read her flat, it's like I either want to make her a villain or I want to make her like a saint somehow in this, right? I want her to be like, Naomi,
Yeah.
why'd you change your name to Bitter? And why'd you tell Ruth to go worship her idols? Like, get it together. Or we don't see at all how the pain has affected even her faith and her view of God. That pain offers a testing and a trial of our faith in God that is the most difficult. Is God still faithful and good when everything has fallen apart? And I love that the Bible doesn't hold back in describing her as complex, because we are.
Yeah.
Because in our suffering, it's like we are simultaneously trying to wrestle with God still being faithful, but everything has fallen apart.
Absolutely.
And within this story and other stories of the Bible casts them very honestly.
That's right.
Very honestly. Like, I'm not trying to hide and make Naomi like she thought everything was great. And she was like, I'm just trusting the Lord to do what he's going to do.
Yeah.
She is not that way.
Right.
And it doesn't stop what
Right.
God's doing.
Right, totally.
It doesn't stop what God's doing in her life as she struggles through the bitterness of her suffering. And if you sit with Naomi and what she has just experienced and imagine yourself there losing everything and having no other options.
Yeah.
This is what this biblical character is going through.
Absolutely. And how
She's in the
encouraging-
depths.
Yeah, how encouraging is it just to be like, God's sovereign purposes of my life are not contingent on how I feel about him.
Praise the Lord
Here
for
we
that.
are.
She
Not.
totally places God in the enemy category. The
He
Lord
took it away
Almighty
from me.
has done this. The Lord has done this,
His hands against me.
Exactly. And it's like,
Yes.
it's not. And it, if I'm thinking from a human version of the Lord, I'm like, yeah, I would probably be against you now since you think I'm in the enemy category. But God doesn't treat us based off of how we feel about him. He can take it because it's not going to stop him from doing what he wants to do. So if you've ever had these days where you're like, life just sucks and it's hard and I feel like God's against me, it's okay for you to articulate that.
Absolutely.
God can take it and it doesn't change. He doesn't change. And I do think one of the things that reading the Bible does it makes you a more honest human. Not a perfect saint. You're just a more honest human. I am Naomi from day to day. I am David struggling in the cave, wondering, how long, O Lord, will you turn your face? I know theologically the Lord hasn't turned his face around away from me.
Yeah.
But some days it helps just to say it.
Well, I just think too, this is an opportunity for us to really ask us and ourselves and inquire of the Lord of like, where have I brought an identity on through my suffering? Like I'm a divorcee, I'm a widow,
Yeah.
I'm a woman who can't get pregnant,
Yeah.
I'm the victim of abuse,
Right.
and those things are true in the sense of something has happened.
Yeah.
And the question is for Naomi, for all of us, of like, where are then we wearing that and then we're living out of it? And so
Right.
there's space to like say, like, this is really hard. But she legitimately renamed herself. We don't go quite that bold and that obvious
Right.
because people would just shoot back at us and be like, no, you're not.
What's wrong with you?
But we live out of it. We
Sure.
live out of these false
Right.
identities of I'm bitter. And yes, you might be a widow.
Yeah.
You might be someone who's had a divorce,
Right.
whatever that label is, and yet it isn't who we are and how we can
Right.
live that out. And
That's
that's the beauty, I think. And I think it's they really don't keep calling her that through the book, which I love. I'm
No,
like, I
yeah.
would have hated it if like the
Yeah.
book kept going and we just
And
started
Mara,
referring
yeah,
to as
yeah,
Mara. Yeah.
yeah.
That's
And
fine.
it's like, yeah, okay, you think you're that, but I'm going to keep calling you Naomi because
Right.
you are a pleasant one, because that's who I
Yeah.
created you to be, is what
That's
God's
right.
saying. And it's
That's
like,
right.
for all of us that are in Christ,
Yeah.
we are daughters, we are sons, and we get to walk in that in the midst of
Right.
really hard things in our
Yeah.
grief.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's just an encouragement, too. Naomi probably thought nothing would change in her life. And I recently heard this from a friend who's in some intense suffering. And he's like, this is the way it's always going to be. This is the suffering. It's
hopeless,
never
yeah.
going to. And I'm like, no, you're just in chapter 1.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Chapter 4 is coming. As God's people, it's like we want so badly for Naomi to know that there's a chapter 4 coming.
Yeah.
Naomi is as honest as she is so that we can know that there's a chapter 4 coming.
Yeah.
So I just think in the midst of looking at Naomi, there is a good moment just looking at her face here in Ruth 1, just going, I need the reminder that there's a chapter 4 coming. I don't have to live as if chapter 1 is all there is.
Yeah.
It's just good for us as Christians. It doesn't mean put on a fake smile. It doesn't mean to. What we're doing here in reading Ruth is we're seeing an example of how life can be really hard, and yet there's a chapter 4 coming, and we're taking an equity loan from chapter 4 and we're bringing it into chapter 1.
Yes.
Because if I mean, just imagine if I read to the end of chapter 1, I'm like, this is a terrible book.
Right.
This is awful.
Right.
I just stopped. Why do I keep reading? Well, because chapter 4 is coming. So I'm taking an equity loan and I'm reading it into
Yeah.
Ruth 1 as well. And then we got to do that in our own lives too.
Totally. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Yeah.
I love it. All right, we've just got a little bit left here. I think I'm going to follow my intuition here. I think there is an Exodus note here in this
Yes.
section
Yes, absolutely.
about a name change, and it changes to Mara.
Yeah.
So what is that about?
Yeah, so if you go back to Exodus 1, when the Hebrews lose their baby boys, life is Mara. It actually uses that word for them, that they are Mara. And so that's one of the big, making that connection. There is one other one, though. I think that it's kind of a name change
Yeah.
because it's a participle in Hebrew, which basically means it's a title. So when you look at Ruth, Ruth is the one who returned. Like now we see it as Ruth returned, but she was the one who returned in Hebrew. And you're immediately like, she's Moabite. Like she's never been to Israel.
Yeah.
So why is it the one who returned? Well, what you need to know about the word returned in Ruth is it's from the Hebrew word shuv, and that's an Exodus word, right? So, I mean, Exodus is all about the return, all about the return. So I think when you see that even there, it's like, well, Naomi connects with the Mara, the loss of the Hebrew lads, the famine and all that, but then Ruth connects with, she's a part of the generation of the returning Israelites, the ones who are returning to the land. She's never been to Israel, but she's spiritually returning
She's
in
in.
this
Yeah.
Exodus.
Yeah.
She's coming back to her people and her land.
Yeah.
She's not
being
the
in there.
foreign woman anymore that has
Right.
is not come in.
I love it too because throughout this book, Ruth the Moabite, it's Ruth the Moabite, Ruth the Moabite, Ruth the Moabite. By chapter 4, the Moabite falls off.
I love it.
It's going to be amazing. By the time we get to the end,
Mm.
everybody's identity changes to something even better than what it was before.
Hey, y'all, by the end, that Moabite's going to fall off. It's going to fall
that's
off of you, right?
That's right.
I have a question about this. We'll wrap up soon. So I should have looked up the chapter, but I didn't. So in Exodus, I think it's still Exodus. Yeah. Is it 19? When they want water, they complain they don't have it, or that the water is bitter. It's
Yeah.
Mara.
Yeah.
And they complain so much
Yeah.
that the name of the land is actually changed to bitter. So
Yeah.
it goes from being called Rephaim to
Yeah.
now it's called bitter because you complained so much
Right.
about the bitter water.
Yeah.
Now the name
Yeah.
has to change because
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
so overwhelming that
Yeah.
you called it that.
Absolutely.
That was
Yeah.
what I thought of, that a city name changed
Yeah.
into bitter
Yeah.
because of the bitter complaint of what they were going through.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's just like there are some things that are so hard that it feels like your identity has just changed. Your settings change. Just
Yeah.
your perspective
Everything
of everything
is different.
is
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
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 Well, that's great. Well, Justin, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
This is Ruth chapter 1. And y'all, I cannot wait to see what it means when it says it was the beginning of the barley harvest. It feels like a narrator voice, and it was the beginning of the barley harvest. So keep listening, keep reading, and let's see what happens in this barley harvest. I love it. Thanks.